So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Industry Pulse, which is entitled Meeting Gen Z, Our Future Employees. My name is John Storm, and I'm the Director of the MBA Programmes at the University of Aberdeen Business School. I'll be your host today as we listen to and learn from the thoughts and experiences of who I would view as aspirational Gen Zs. I'm therefore grateful to be joined today by four fantastic speakers from diverse backgrounds. And with me, I have today Vadym Kapliuk, who is the president and founder of the Aberdeen Legacy Association. He's currently a second-year student at the University of Aberdeen, originally from Ukraine, but he's quite passionate about connecting alumni with current students. And his association, which was founded within just 6 months of launch, they became the university's largest student association. We have Maxwell McKay, who is the founder and CEO of HeyIT. Recruiting 12 people for a startup at just 15 years old, Maxwell has been running startups since before most of his peers even had the option to study their first business course at high school. Wasifa Pasha is the Assistant Vice President of Commercial Banking at HSBC. Identified as a high-performing talent during an internship, she faced the choice of a fast-track promotion opportunity at HSBC or to return to complete her postgraduate study. And last alphabetically, but not least, we have Ella Taylor, who is a consulting intern at Trajectry in Shanghai. Considered a cross-cultural individual, Ella was born in Singapore, grew up in Thailand, and now lives in China, where she completes her final years of study. Now, our audience today is one with a range of experiences and exposures to Gen Z. Some of our audience members may even be members of Z generation themselves. Now, whether you are involved in the recruitment and training of Gen Zs, working alongside a Gen Z, or perhaps completely unfamiliar with the expectations and perspectives of our younger peers, yet curious to learn more, we aim to make this roundtable discussion accessible and stimulating for everyone who's joining. Now, to help us achieve this, our schedule today has two components. First, I'll be providing a short 10 to 15-minute presentation that introduces some of the fundamental concepts and trends which this young generation has within the context of work. Following this, we will have an extended roundtable discussion which involves our four speakers. During that point, I will invite all members of the audience to post questions into our chat box, and I'll help to pose these questions to our speakers. However, it is one of these things with such an audience and such a discussion as we have today that maybe not all questions will be addressed. So without further ado, I shall start this opening presentation. So Gen Z, as we approach this today, I want to briefly cover four things. First, in terms of defining well, who we have even as our audience, because that's going to shape our discussion today. Who is Gen Z and what can employers do? And then, of course, we will have a good roundtable discussion. So who's joining us today? Well, at this moment on our call, we have live over 30 people. And for those who have registered, there was a question in terms of what's your motivation for joining today? And these were some of the responses that people were sharing. So we can see that a lot of people were coming from a working background, particularly in HR, talent development, or general management, where there's an exposure to working either in terms of recruitment or managing members of the younger generation. And there is a lot of interest today in terms of understanding the expectations and approaches of the younger generation when approaching into the workplace. So we're hoping to address several of these aspects today, and that's where, as members of the audience, please do raise questions to our panelists. Before going in and meeting our panelists, I think it is quite important that we all get a core foundation. Well, who is Gen Z? And in some ways, this maybe doesn't sound the nicest of questions, but why should we care? Well, so Gen Z, what we mean by Gen Z is really anyone who is born from 1997 through to 2012. This is really the fundamental definition of Gen Z. And when we think of Gen Z, there are certain terms which have almost become synonymous or used to describe the younger generation. We might say the younger generation is digitally native, globally engaged, or has an inclusive or value orientation. Now, these things sound nice and in many ways can be quite simple, but what does it mean? We also hear that Gen Z can be disrupting the status quo, bringing new ways of doing. So let's, for example, just think about digital native. What does that mean? Well, if you think in terms of the context of anyone who's been born from 1997, growing up, key years, say during 2010 and onwards, this is a generation which, by and large, has grown up with smartphones, where there has always been access to technology. So simple things such as having the experience of answering a landline phone, where every member of the family will be able to eavesdrop on your conversation. For so many of the younger generation, they've not had this sort of experience. They've not necessarily had to answer a lot of phone calls. It's been a habit of using WhatsApp and different sorts of text-based messaging. So within the workplace scenario, we have a lot of people who are thinking, I'm trying to get in contact with younger generation members of our team, but they're not answering the phone. Well, they're digital natives. There is a lot of positive, of course, with being a digital native and being familiar with different technologies, but there's always a flip side too. And we shouldn't be surprised when some habits are maybe different. We say that the younger generation is globally engaged. Well, yes, absolutely. But what's maybe a flip side of being globally engaged? What do we mean by this? It's not suddenly that we can fly from the UK to China to America for $10. That's not what we mean, right? These have not become instantly accessible global travel. Right now, we have Wasifa, who is in Bangladesh, Ella, who is in mainland China, myself, Vadym, and Maxwell, who are in the UK. We are globally engaged. We have a global audience present joining with us, but at the same time, we are grounded in front of a laptop and a computer screen. So if you zoom out just for a moment, you sometimes see these pictures of the stereotypical Gen Z looking at a handheld device, glued to a screen. Well, in many ways, that's what we're doing right now. As a globally engaged audience, we're in front of a computer screen. And, you put this into another sort of sense. What does this mean in terms of simple things such as introversion and extroversion? You might have someone who is highly extroverted, highly engaged, going out communicating with 10, 20 people, speaking in front of large audiences. But you zoom out and actually we're seeing someone who is at home, quiet, headphones on, in front of a screen. So we now have this concept of the quiet extrovert. It seems almost counterintuitive for people maybe of a different generation. And similarly, our younger generational colleagues are growing up with access to things like Twitter and various different social media platforms where there is accessibility to provide their voice, to be part of global dialogue. And we are seeing a lot of expression with regards to inclusivity and values. And this is coming across widely, at least in principle. These are platforms which didn't exist for previous generations, where it was often, mind your space, the elders are speaking. You need to earn your right to speak. So there's many terms which we might say when communicating about this younger generation, but sometimes these terms, what do they necessarily mean? So I'm hopefully providing a little bit of an insight here in terms of the two sides of a coin, shall we say, when we're thinking of the younger generation. Now, this is important because at the moment, there is around about 2 billion members of this Gen Z population. And that's around 27% of the working population worldwide. So very, very much we could argue Gen Z is the future. We need to be aware of the expectations and needs of this younger generation and how to adapt ourselves in order to incorporate as much as we expect Gen Z to be able to incorporate and come into the existing workplace. Now, I'm going to share a little bit about some of the challenges that Gen Z have been facing, as well afterwards, some of the things which Gen Z can also bring into the workplace. And one of the defining points for so many members of the younger generation is COVID. Now, for perhaps many of us, we might think, COVID again, isn't that already history? Well, yes, in many ways it is, but also we need to bear in mind that the younger generation was particularly impacted. So how? How have they been particularly impacted? Well, many members of the younger generation went from an employment perspective, in part-time employment, often within the service sector, often within the gig economy, and these sort of roles. These sort of roles were the most impacted roles during COVID. And according to Pew Research, during the early stages of COVID, around about 50% of Gen Zs were either lost their job or took significant pay cut as an impact of COVID. Hayes Consulting, major group doing HR consulting, they've basically summarized that Gen Z was meaningfully disrupted at a critical point in their lives. Critical point in their life being either, say, at high school and getting ready to sit the exams, which is going to determine which university they can go to for their future, or maybe at university, again, looking to sit exams, which is going to determine are they eligible, yes or no, for a potential grad job, or maybe they were one of the older Gen Zs where they were actually graduating university, looking to start their first job, really riving, excited, ready to go, and then lockdowns happen. Everything's remote. And for so many people, maybe even laid off. It was a meaningful disruption, which is very difficult to recover from. They haven't yet necessarily built up the resilience which comes from experience. And it's one of those things where we also need to recall, and I've been very in particular with this reference from the American Psychological Association, because you'll note that this was back in 2018, even before COVID. They were highlighting that the Gen Zs are already needing more support from employers with regards to mental health and well-being. Well, that's only been exacerbated as a consequence of COVID. Our employers, are we really ready? So COVID has had a significant impact. And we see this on the bottom line, both financially as well as in terms of the wider economy. Financially, at the individual level, it's highlighted that around about 6 out of 10 Gen Zs are living paycheck to paycheck for those who are already in employment. And within the UK context, around about a quarter of people who are unemployed, and this means not in employment, education, or training, around about a quarter is due to ill health. And that might be because of COVID, but as well as other sort of factors too. That is a staggeringly large proportion of the population. It's quite an alarming statistic. And if we went back 10 years, it would be a smaller fraction, a considerably smaller fraction of the population who are classified as NEET, not in employment, education, or training, who would be in that status due to ill health and mental well-being. So from an employment perspective, yes, on one side, this younger generation's got access to education, universities in a way that many other generations have not. They are formally the most qualified generation ever, but they need flexibility, they need security, and also because of the cost of living crisis, they do have an awareness of the need for more money. This is the present. Now, I don't just want to paint a negative picture, as we've said. So Gen Z is coming into the workplace. They're bringing this tech savviness. We've mentioned that they're digitally native. I like the way that Zurich Consulting, they say that Gen Zs they're like a mosaic of social media channels. They've had exposure to so many channels, which I myself and many of our older colleagues are just not familiar with. They're some of the first users of fintech and AI technologies, which are transforming the world of work. We see within the workplace that actually, for example, in marketing and advertisement videos, a lot of the videos which have been going viral in the past 1 or 2 years have actually been created and designed by Gen Z interns within the workplace. And that's because the younger generation have an exposure to different platforms, are familiar with the wider audiences of their peers, and know how to pivot and position in a way that often people with 10, 20 years of experience in marketing might not, right? We might not have the familiarity with the younger generation's lingo or the demands and needs of the younger generation's media platforms in quite the same way. So they're bringing this creativity, they're bringing this tech savviness. And also, as Deloitte are recognizing that these things combined with familiarity with the need for being analytical, once we combine these digital tool skill sets and these analytical skill sets, we've got people who are ready for the future of work. This is a great thing for employers. So with this in mind, what can employers do when receiving and working with our younger generational colleagues? Well, I'm not going to answer all of this. Of course, we've got our panelists, but I'm just going to highlight a few points, and then we'll look to hand over and bring in our speakers for today. So there are a range of initiatives that employers can do, a range of things that employers can be aware of. And one thing is, we live in a world where we are more readily acknowledging that there's need for, say, accepting remote workers. Okay, now when we are doing this, and if we're bringing on, say, a younger generational colleague into the workplace, we need to think, okay, these digitally savvy people, yes, but are they necessarily acquainted, familiar with the different practices that we have within our workplace? If this is their first job, they might need still special care. We shouldn't just assume because someone is digitally native that they can also digitally and remotely onboard themselves. They might need particular care. We also need to remember that, yes, there is a cost of living crisis. There are housing issues around the world. A lot of our younger colleagues might be in a flat share environment where they're maybe they're working in a kitchen, for example, and they've got flatmates who are walking backwards and forwards around them, but maybe not necessarily have these comfortable and convenient locations at home where they can just set aside and have a home office like some of our other colleagues. So as employers, if we're thinking about remote working, we shouldn't just be thinking about the flexibility and the benefit that these things have, but also actually, are these benefits necessarily entirely of benefit to the younger generation? Are there other ways that we can support them when they're coming into the workplace? We need to think in terms of coaching as well. Now, coaching, there are multiple aspects of this. Coaching, it's not just, oh, we've got younger generation coming in, what can we do here? But we also need to think more broadly. Our workplaces now will have 4 or potentially 5 generations working within them. Now, just as I've highlighted, we've got the younger generation who've maybe got exposure to a lot of these new technologies. They can share these with their older colleagues. But similarly, our older colleagues, we can look at the younger generation coming in and we can recognize maybe we're operating with legacy systems which haven't been updated for 10 or even 20 years' time. Maybe our younger colleagues haven't necessarily worked with some of these legacy systems. Perhaps there's opportunity for mutual coaching here or intergenerational coaching. And once we start doing this and building relationships, providing this a bit more of a purpose, it's not just a job, it's not just a paycheck, there are relationships, there is a way to be connected, embedded, belonging within this wider entity, then we're actually providing opportunities for Gen Z, not only in terms of a job, but somewhere where, as I say, they can belong and progress and work their way maybe up or into a company. This is really important. And relatedly to this point on opportunity and purpose, the WEF, that's the World Economic Forum, they have highlighted that purpose, which guides culture, is the most powerful tool that companies have at their disposal to meet the intrinsic needs of new talent. Now, it's one of those things at the same time, as employers, yes, we like to have value statements, we like to have our different values and behaviors and these sort of things, but they need to be authentic, right? And these two stats, I think, highlight why. 55% of Gen Zs research the company's environmental impact and policies before accepting a job offer. So yes, you might have a value statement which sounds nice, but is it just a marketing tool, a marketing gimmick which people are going to see through? If that's the case, you might not get the necessary candidates that you're wanting come into your company. They'll just see right through it. And this next statistic, that's 17% of people in Gen Z who are changing job are changing due to concern about how their organization is tackling these value issues such as climate change. I think that's also quite staggering and something for us in work to bear in mind. So these are just a few thoughts that we as employers can have in mind when either looking to recruit, train, or retain our younger generational colleagues. Now, of course, we're not here to listen to myself alone. We are here to listen to the thoughts and opinions from our four panelists. So I'm therefore going to stop sharing my screen and we're going to see our panelists come on screen just momentarily. So here, I do have a couple of questions just to kick us off, but as I've already mentioned, this is going to be an open discussion for all members of the audience. Please do feel free to type in a question into the chat box and we'll bring this to our audience. But just to get us started, a couple of questions. So Vadym first. During your first year at university in Aberdeen, you founded a student association, and within just a few months of founding, you had attracted thousands of followers. May you briefly introduce the purpose of this association to our audience, and then suggest what does this large following tell us about the hunger of your audience?
Yes, of course. So Aberdeen Legacy Association is the main purpose of it is interview people who studied at the University of Aberdeen and now work in different industries across like different continents and countries. And we ask them questions about their student life, how to get promoted, how to get internships, how to get employed, basically, ask them tips for current students. And I think the main reason why we attracted so many students to follow us is that everyone will need to find a job eventually. And since we interview people from different industries, ranging from law to finance and medicine, big pharmaceutical companies, so we're very applicable basically to everyone on campus. So, and another thing is that all these people we interview, they share the same background as our students. So they studied the same libraries, they went to the same coffee shops on campus, and I'm sure that our students learn a lot from them because yeah, they have a lot to share with our students. Yeah.
It's great, thank you, Vadym. And we are getting the sense that there is this hunger to understand the workplace, to know what that's like, and relatedly thinking in terms of going into work. Wasifa, I mean, you were studying for a master's degree a couple of years ago, and you were faced with the challenging decision of continuing to work or accept a job with HSBC. Now, I've mentioned that Hayes Consulting, they spoke about providing an opportunity rather than a job. How much did that resonate with you? How can employers make their opportunity clear for applicants or new recruits?
Yeah, thank you, John. Thank you, everyone, for having me. So I'm Wasifa. I'm from Bangladesh, and like John mentioned, I'm currently at HSBC. So last year, I was faced with this decision, right? So I completed my undergrad, and I was already enrolled into a master's program. And so my institution, they offered me a full-time role while I was doing an internship at HSBC. Now, definitely a full-time role was more appealing, right? Because it gave me job security. It was not contractual. So I knew that there is security there. But so I had conversation with my line manager who offered me the full-time role. And I asked him, like, can you convince me why I should let go of a full-time offer for this internship? Because it's going to end in like 6 months, right? So the things that you were talking about, what employers should look for, I think those resonated a lot with me. So I was sort of trying to see where I see myself long term, where I would actually have my needs met, right? So this is my first job, and I wanted to make sure that through this full-time role, I will not only be able to sort of explore different opportunities, because that role that I was given at my university, I did not have a lot of exposure. So it was very, but here at HSBC, they give us the opportunity to explore what we might like, not only roles that so for example, if you have different departments, you can actually rotate in the departments and you can figure out whether you like it or not. And then you get a lot of coaching, like you mentioned, a lot of coaching, a lot of opportunities to enhance your skills. So I think in terms of those aspects, HSBC appealed to me more. And you'll obviously help me make that decision. So thank
you. That's right. I'm fortunate to be in a position where me and Wasifa go back a little while, and we were having conversations in those early days. I think we recognize a company like HSBC. It's a multinational. It's maybe in the position to be able to provide a lot of this flexibility, the job rotation, the exposure to different ways of doing the coaching, as Wasifa has put in, and these things are tremendously of value. Equally, at the same time, I guess we recognize, around about 90% of people tend to be employed with smaller entities. And Maxwell, you're yourself involved in a smaller entity, and you've been employing fellow peers since you were just 15 years old. So I mean, let's just say a hypothetical candidate was here today, applying for a position. What type of characters or behaviors would you look for when looking for employment, or perhaps just connecting with Vasifa's point there as well at the same time? If people were looking for security and opportunity, how can you communicate that when you're just working with a small entity?
Yeah, absolutely. So, when I'm looking to bring someone new onto the team, there's a few things that I do look for. To give you a bit of a background, in the early days when I started the business, we were fully remote, and we continued that presence without an office space for approximately 3 years. And I know that Gen Z, for example, are keen to stick to working fully remotely or from a hybrid approach. But just for me personally, I'm not too keen to keep that, because I feel you lose that company culture and the ability to just walk up to a desk and ask a question. It's something that has become immensely popular since COVID, but getting back into the office is something that I'm 100% keen for. I feel like it's in those moments that you have fantastic creativity and collaboration in the office. And off the back of that, mental health is a huge factor, and remotely it's incredibly challenging to be able to gauge that from someone and actually see how they're actually doing. So from an employer perspective, it's always something that I try and stay on top of, through quarterly reviews and being able to make everyone feel like they're part of the HeyIT family, so that when we're open to discussion on these types of topics. And I feel that's what's really works well for us. Someone who is able to actually slot into the family. From I suppose from a more of a business sense, we get clients that come to us from other IT suppliers, and they say that over the past 5 years, they've never seen their IT supplier in person. Obviously from a cost perspective, that makes a lot of sense, but you lose that human connection as people buy from people at the end of the day. So it's actually, one of our USPs that we try and visit our clients in person every now and then, or even have a Teams call with, the camera on. Gen Z, I feel, they've slightly got comfortable with sitting with the camera off on meetings. So really someone who is able to put across that in a confident way in the business, even if they're working from a hybrid approach. I suppose coming back to what you said earlier, John, I noticed that a lot of people my age are actually nervous to just pick up the phone, whether it's phoning your GP or in a business sense, being able to call a client rather than actually being stuck in an endless email chain back and forth. So I'd say that I'm keen to look for someone who is comfortable to pick up the phone and talk to a client directly, as I feel the feedback we get from our clients is that sometimes they just wish for people to pick up the phone and talk to them without having endless WhatsApp messages or endless emails. So someone who is able to be confident doing that and appeal to different generations. As for some people, ultimately that's just normal for them. They think, why wouldn't you just call me, firsthand? I suppose finally, when I look for new hires, I always strive for looking for people with integrity and honesty. They're some of our business values, actually. So I feel like they're, a non-negotiable for me. I seek team members who are open, honest, transparent, especially when things go wrong, and they're able to put their hands up and say, this didn't actually go well, and they're open to accepting feedback. And generally, Gen Z, I feel, are more open to take constructive criticism, and learn from it, which is crucial in a collaborative environment.
Excellent, thanks. I wonder if some of the people from HR and experience in recruitment are maybe encouraged by what you're saying, because I think a lot of that it's almost irrespective of age. You're looking for a lot of the same things there. I want to acknowledge there are a couple of questions into the chat. We'll come to these in just a moment. I just want to invite Ella to join the conversation with a little question for her before we come to the questions into the chat. So, Ella, the younger generation has got a reputation for emphasizing diversity within the workplace. Now, in many ways, you've got quite an incredible background. We could almost say that you're like the metaphorical poster child for diversity. Thailand, Singapore, now China. Of course, we can hear the Irish in you. And if I'm right, I think your father's Japanese, right? So you're not Japanese. We're forgetting that part. Japanese company or association there, but definitely very international. And how would you say that your cross-cultural upbringing has shaped who you are, and what value or strengths do you think that brings to an employer?
Right, okay. I think this is a really interesting question. I think when anybody is quite different, when there's something that makes you unique, when you're a bit younger, you try and hammer it out. So for me, growing up my whole life in Asia, when I was 16, I made the decision to, move to Ireland and see what life there could be like. And very quickly, I realized that it was a lot more competitive. I realized that the opportunities that were presented to me here in Asia, because I was in a sense very similar, like I was graduating with, a class of 100 people of whom I didn't really stand out against, being in a smaller town in Cork there. So that's, I think, in shaping why I'm in China, I made the decision to come here because I acknowledged that with my background, being able to speak Chinese over here as a foreigner was an asset to me. It was something that was perhaps more valued over here. And then in terms of how I think diversity in this form has shaped me is I feel you become a lot more resourceful because the path, if you are diverse and different, it's not as linear. So for example, in China, LinkedIn is blocked. So in terms of finding career opportunities here, I can't make use of the Chinese platforms. They're all in Chinese, and most of them will only hire Chinese people. They can't accept foreigners. So you have to become very resourceful in terms of, how you're meeting people, what positions you're putting yourself into. You have to be very explicit with the value you're bringing. So when you say, like, what is the value that I've brought employers? I feel like I've only brought as much value as much as they've appreciated my background. So for example, in Chinese startups that I've worked for, more value because I was able to bring in foreign clients and do the outreach and the BD, and that was a value to them. But for example, in working for international companies here, where they wanted me to face the China market and do the cold calls in Chinese, now with the Zhongwen bu tai hao, like my Chinese is not as good as other Chinese people. So there I was probably underperforming in their eyes. So I think it's really important to address, like, you have to be sure of the line manager or the hiring person is wanting your difference. They see the value in it, and that's going to correlate to how much value you bring them, how well you perform, and your growth in that company, I feel.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. I can resonate with some of this from my own experiences moving to China when I was in my early 20s as well. Excellent. I mean, I guess relating to this, but also picking on some of the questions that we've got in the chat here. We're mentioning about Tracy's question here, challenges that you guys might have faced when transitioning into the workplace and what might have eased that. Sounds like, Ella, there needs to be wisdom from people within the workplace to be able to identify the skills which you're bringing in and know how to place you. And from Wasifa, you were really highlighting as well the ability to just connect on a one-to-one basis with a line manager, a line supervisor, and have those conversations around needs. So I think we've touched upon a few things here. I want to acknowledge Daniel's question here, and he refers to a study from Forbes, and which mentions that around about 60% of employers have admitted to firing Gen Zs. And part of this is because of issues with laziness, entitlement, immaturity, lack of motivation. So there are these stereotypes which fit in. And, like it or not, this is often what's in the news. Maxwell, you've touched perhaps a little bit about your perspective when recruiting and what you're looking for as an employer. But in terms of these wider stereotypes, do we need to change them or do we just work within them? I mean, what's your thinking on this?
I think, I have in the hiring process seen some people who, do fit into those stereotypes, unfortunately, with maybe a bit of a sense of entitlement and things being handed to you on a golden plate, which is difficult. And I think is one of those things that does come with just experience. I think maybe a lot of it is just about getting stuck in, and a lot of people actually coming into a business and having that wake up call of, I need to be able to, be more of a self-starter, especially with everything being online. People get tasked through on emails, and it's very easy to just kind of fall behind and almost cruise in a business. So I guess for me, really, it's I suppose, how do we change such a stereotypical view of this generation? It's a difficult question to answer, because I know it can be widespread, and I've been able to avoid it just through the hiring process. But there has been a few occasions where people have come into the business, and maybe in the first couple of weeks, I was maybe thinking they were going down that route, but actually they've actually had that wake up call and they've changed in the business, and I've been able to kind of develop them as a person, and bring the good out of them, and be able to use that in the business.
I was recently working with a company, and a local company here in Scotland, and one of the things which intrigued me in this company was that they had mentors for young talent coming in, but their average age of the mentors was like 25, which I was intuitively, I was like, are they really a mentor by definition? But I just thought that was quite interesting, and I just, the reason why I mentioned this is you yourself are quite young, Maxwell. Do you think that being young helps with having some of that dialogue, some of that conversation?
Yes and no, because I think with some people, obviously with my age and my experience, I think if I approach some people, even if they're a couple years older than me, there is that feeling of, well, what do you know? You're only 22, I've had a few more years on my back. Whereas other times it's actually very beneficial, because I feel people can relate to it more. If, I am speaking to some people, they will go, I can see what you mean, I'm able to resonate with them a lot more, which is helpful. So there's that kind of awkward 50-50 split where you have some people who, would see it as a benefit, and then others where, you have to try and get over that mentality of the age bias. It's a big thing even in business. As I approach new clients, there is always that thing, consciously in the back of my mind about, I might be in a room full of people doing a networking event, and I'm the youngest in the room. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's always something that I've just, got with me.
Yeah, I mean, obviously you need to have a lot of confidence yourself, and I would imagine a lot of people find that attractive. We like confident people, right? I mean, Vadym, you engage with a wide range of people, a lot of them quite in senior executive positions, so around the world, most of them alumni from the university. And yes, the nature of your interviews with these people tends to be the advice that they might be able to bring for the younger generation. But just touching upon Daniel's question, which is how should employers utilize this generation's peculiar qualities or traits to suit current job needs? From the conversations you've had with, the number of people that you're connecting with, have any of them commented with regards to their openness, their willingness to work with the younger generation, or why they're even so happy to have these conversations with you? Sorry, just the classical online thing there. Yeah, you're on mute.
So yes, for example, a couple of weeks we interviewed the lady who is HR finance director for SLB Schlumberg. It's a big energy company which has operations around the world. And after the interview, yes, she mentioned that she's very interested in recruiting people from universities, yes, young generation. And I asked her the question why, and she said because they're like proficient in like technologies, yes, AI, and all of the skills which are highly needed in energy sector, for example, and the company she works for. And yes, she recognizes this need because she's an HR. Yes, so this is one of the examples I can tell you.
Excellent, thanks. Now, so George has raised a good and interesting question. I'm sure it's going to pose answers which go well beyond me, right? Who inspires you? If you had to think of a particular person who maybe has been motivating you or inspiring you, either in terms of personally or your future career, could you take a moment and just think of who that might be? Maybe rather than my ask, because you might need a moment, we can see you all. So if you've got a name in mind, perhaps raise a hand and I'll invite you to share back to us. Maxwell.
Yeah, so for me, especially in the early days of starting business, you know, I'm quite a fan of, you know, in my free time, you know, maybe watching some YouTube videos. And one of the creators that I follow quite a lot is Ben Francis, the CEO of Gymshark. Quite recently, he's had a series about, you know, actually running his business, what it takes, and you can follow his story from, you know, starting in I guess a similar age to me to where he's got now, where, you know, it's I think $1 billion company now, and it's just being able to see the kind of behind the scenes, the day-to-day running. You know, I feel that really inspires me. You know, I'm able to watch that, and after the end of the video, you know, I've even personally got a bit of a drive to be able to incorporate maybe some of the things he's doing from a managerial perspective into my organization, and also just a general drive to, you know, get to a similar stage in terms of, you know, staff numbers and, you know, having some of the same problems that he's having. You know, I think it's always great to be able to see his mindset and how he comes at a problem, you know, and is able to put together the pieces of the jigsaw and get, you know, a full picture.
It's great. Thank you. Ella, yeah.
So there's also another founder who like documents his story. His name is Daniel Dalen, and he's a European but grew up in Hong Kong and now doing business between China, mainland China, and the West. And I think for me, what was inspiring was it goes beyond just making money. It's also in terms of like rebuilding this relationship, and also in terms of being a foreigner, being able to speak fluent Chinese, leading a team in Chinese, and, you know, really integrating into the culture. I think that really inspires me as someone over here is, you know, of course your difference is appreciated, but there's also you should also want to accommodate the people in the room. I always feel like when you're taking a seat at the table here, that language shouldn't switch to English. You know, it should. I should be the one to adapt there. So I think he's the only individual I've seen who, you know, is foreign in China, speaking Chinese, doing his business in Chinese. And I think there's a lot of deeper meaning behind just the YouTube views and the posts he's making there. I think it can leave a really long impact. Yeah.
Excellent. Just maybe want to connect with what you're saying and just take a step back for a moment as well. You know, if we were looking, say, 10, 20 years ago, a lot of people would have said something like, you know, Steve Jobs, Jack Ma, Jeff Bezos, and these sort of entrepreneurs who went on to become multi-billionaires, right? But what we're hearing is, yes, I mean, these two individuals who we've quoted, they might be very successful, but they're also very personable and relatable to your own personal, like your own journeys. I mean, Maxwell was in terms of going through that founder experience, but then also Ella in terms of that cross-cultural, speaking another language, being a foreigner in another land. That's something that you can relate to at an individual level, much more so than perhaps some of the more traditional icons that past generations have had. And I also think it's interesting that, you know, even in terms of medium, you know, we both mentioned social media posts, blogs, but also YouTube videos. And this is how we're also learning about these individuals. It's not necessarily a biography, which might be part of it, but there's an exposure to a wider kind of more media than just the traditional textbook, right? So that's good, and I think that relates a little bit to what Alan is asking, because Alan, you know, he's put in here that PwC have mentioned that Gen Z often has quite a short attention span, right? Now, is this something which our panelists would maybe agree with? We're seeing a few nods. Maybe Wasifa, would you mind providing a little comment on this one?
Hi, John. Yes, for sure. You know what? I was having trouble keeping up with the conversation today as well. So I completely agree. So, for example, if I were to give an example from my everyday life, so let's say I'm focused on one task, right? Because I have a client-facing role, I constantly get bombarded with emails and calls and people from other team coming up to me. So I would say it's a lot of external distractions as well as my inherent ability, or I would say lack of, to concentrate. But if you're looking for suggestions on how to do that, there's this really cool technique called Pomodoro, where you just take a 30 minutes of block. You block 30 minutes of time and you work for 25 minutes at a stretch. And then for 5 minutes, you get off your desk, you take a brisk walk, because that helps bring your attention back. So I fully agree, but yeah, that's my suggestion.
Excellent. Is that why just a few minutes ago, perhaps, saw your camera go off screen? No, it's fantastic. And yeah, I like that. And I think that relates actually to Santosh's question, which is about risk and resilience, and knowing, you know, where you are within yourself. But another thing is not just being able to understand self, but to know maybe when to pivot, when to change. Maybe if I could come to Ella, when you're thinking in terms of your pivoting, because I think this is something that's relevant for yourself in the past couple of months, what factors do you consider when making such a choice?
Yeah, actually, this is very relevant in terms of, I have decided to, transition careers very, very recently, so to pivot. And in terms of like what factors led me to that choice, it was really, paying attention to how much value the company put on me. And, are you being treated like a production tool or a team member? So production tool in terms of if you're just sitting there 9:30 to 6:30 outputting, are you getting recognition in the room? Are people saying, this piece of work was done by this person, or does that kind of get looked over? Is HR coming to you after a certain period of time and discussing career progression? These are very important because I feel, we are very aware of when we're being valued and when we're not being valued. And I think it's a good decision to pivot when you do recognize this, because, it's important to know when to leave. And I think our generation is, we kind of jump on that. When we know it's time to leave, we will leave. But I think not for the wrong reasons. I think we're just more aware. But yeah, I'm changing positions and I'm very happy with the decision. Yeah.
It's a really interesting point, and I think it relates very well to Mayer's question in the chat here, because it's one of those things where when you are an employer or a manager and you see people leave, you might also sort of reflect and view that negatively on yourself. Is there something that you're doing wrong? What could we have done better? And there's not always that leaving interview where this discussion or the information, the background context is clearly transparent. So within this, this is almost an open question, and either of you can answer this. And what sort of thoughts or comments or suggestions would you have for someone like Mayer who's thinking, okay, well, you've got people who are moving on. What can you do to better understand how to, as a manager, how to tackle high turnover in your younger talents?
I mean, I would say that one of the big things is, especially on social media, there is these trends about, career progressions and, people wanting, I think is quite a traditional way to look at, someone joining a business where you might start when you're 20 and work all the way until retirement in the one business and work your way up the chain. Whereas I think that is it's no longer the case for the younger generation. They want to, you know, maybe stay in one job for a few years and then move to another and kind of be able to gain a wide variety of experience. So I think it's maybe more a mindset change in people, you know, wanting to switch jobs and, you know, have new challenges. I don't know if it goes back to the, you know, the lack of attention that, you know, Gen Z have, where, you know, they might get, you know, bored in a job and they feel they've kind of done all they can. They want to move on to new and exciting challenges. So, I mean, yeah, I think the big thing is obviously just a mindset change, really.
And it sounds like part of that as well is also maybe just letting people go if enough's enough. And similarly for people within management, just to be accepting, like you're saying. I think now the average person has got 10 careers rather than it used to be traditionally 3 or 4 within their lifespan. So this is becoming more of a trend. Wasifa, please.
Yeah, John, I just wanted to add one more point, which is I think you covered this as well. So usually what I see is that after a couple of years, when there is no prospect of career progression or people lack the sense of purpose, that's when they decide to sort of move on. So I think here it is very important to have those one-on-one conversations to make sure to understand what is going on, what is the purpose, because there is a possibility that you might be able to create that sense of purpose within the current role that your employee is in. So again, better communication will definitely help in this.
Thank you. And you know, this relates very well, actually, that's how you first addressed that first question, and it connected with Hay's point with regards to providing opportunity, not just a job. Now we're mentioning about having this dialogue. How much dialogue is enough? Is it, you know, you just got an annual performance review and you have that conversation once a year? Or, I mean, what are you looking for? What would be a balance from the employer?
So if I were to pitch in from my experience, I have like a monthly call with my line manager. We do have the annual performance review. And, you know, we're also encouraged to reach out whenever we feel it's necessary. So we don't actually have to wait till the end of the month if something comes up. So it actually depends on the employee itself, how much frequent this call should be. But definitely, I would say monthly check-ins are, or at least quarterly check-ins would help.
Yeah. So at least something there which is routine, but then the accessibility is what I'm hearing as well. So that as and when needed, and that's got to be felt. It sounds like, and you know, it's quite time demanding as well. If you're line managing 20, 30 people or whatever. Is this something that you try and do with your team, Maxwell?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, since we're quite a small team, I also try and include them in business decisions as well, because obviously, you know, as me being the chief executive of the business, one thing that I always want to drive to my employees is that they also have a sense of purpose, and you know, any changes that they want to try and pursue or any new services that they wish to introduce, they also have that feeling of, yeah, it's not only, you know, I guess my company, it's also their company as well. So, you know, we have quarterly business reviews where we'll go and spend a couple days outside the office and, you know, work on some strategy days. And then we've also got kind of monthly reviews, and we've obviously got kind of our daily stand-up meetings. So communication is always 100% key. You know, we've got some people who are fully remote, and then some people who come to the office, and some people in hybrid. And so it's really just a case of making sure that communication and transparency is key. And going back to what I said earlier, just feeling like they're part of the family, you know, that's an incredible thing for me.
Excellent. Well, thank you all for sharing your thoughts. I mean, an hour very quickly flies by. So as I wrap up today's event, I just want to thank everyone who's joined. I hope that this session has been insightful for you. And I want to reiterate my special thanks, of course, to each of our guests today who've contributed your time, but also your experience with us. And this has also been enabled by our support team at the University of Aberdeen. If you want to learn more about future events like these or suggest topics that you'd like to learn more about, please do engage with the University of Aberdeen Business School on LinkedIn or Twitter. I very much look forward to seeing you again at a future event. Thank you, everyone.